Hello, everyone, and welcome to TactiCon. The very first time we're having this, it's a Steam event just for strategy and tactical games. And welcome to our panel, Tactics in the Future. Today we'll be talking about designing tactics games and sci-fi games in the future and all the complexities and all the cool stuff that comes with that. Why don't we begin by introducing the panel? Maybe we can start with Aliza.
Okay, it's all right. So I'm Aliza Wenders. I'm the lead developer of Ultimate Space Commando Counterforce, which is a sci-fi turn-based tactics game under development. The demo will be available during TactiCon for all of you, and the release is planned for next year. And um, what I can say about myself, I also like role-playing games and board games, and I'm in love with science fiction in general, down to physics, real physics. I think every game, even science fiction, should adhere to the basic rules of nature. So this is my thing, and we will talk about it later, I
Yeah,
guess,
okay.
a
Thank you
bit.
so much. Yeah, and just to elaborate, I should have kind of spoken a little bit in more detail about this panel. Designing sci-fi strategy games. A lot of times when you play these kind of games, you're really focused on the systems, the mechanics. You're really kind of focusing on winning, and sometimes you don't really notice a lot of the background thematic things.
Yes, yes.
And so in this panel, I thought it would be fun to just kind of peel back the curtain and take a look at, how exactly are these games made? What is it like to design something that doesn't exist and also design all these complex balance, things and interesting mechanics and gameplay that go into that. So that's kind of the focus of this panel. Apologies for the late introduction. Why don't we go back to actually going around the panel? Maybe we can start with Lee next.
Absolutely, I can. So I'm Lee Harris. I'm based here in the UK. As you can see, it's morning outside. Some of us are not so fortunate. And I'm developing a game called Fragile Existence, which isn't demoing at Tacticon, but it's currently in development, published by Hooded Horse as of 6 months ago. And it's a game where you ultimately, in the most simplistic terms, play a Dharma from Battlestar Galactica. Um, please don't sue me. Um, and you're basically just taking a fleet and you're going from system to system and trying to, survive. And, and I've been working on that for about 2.5 years now. And I was a teacher before that. And, well, that's me. There I am.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. And yeah, your game, you have the orbital layer, the ground layer, very, very complex. You have, so many, so many things going on. I can't wait to talk about that in more detail.
There's a few things happening. Yeah.
Exactly. Steve, maybe we can go to you next. Can you tell us a little about yourself in the game that you're working on?
Sure. Well, it's called Alliance of the Sacred Sons. It's actually kind of an interesting hybrid. It's kind of a 4X grand strategy RPG. You play basically an 18-year-old emperor or empress, 1,000 years in the future, and humanity has basically been run off their home planet by an alien species. And so you had to kind of find a new place to live. So humanity is kind of degraded in that interregnum. They still have some high technology, but then a lot of things have kind of backslid. So think of it as kind of a futuristic aristocracy, I guess. And and your job essentially is to survive your reign. It's a very the scope is very paradoxian. I know that's kind of a word we don't like to bandy around, but it
Oh, I
is
know what you mean.
it is a lot of it's a very high level type game, but you deal also with a lot of individual characters, a lot of individual elements. It's there are a lot of moving pieces to an empire, so that's kind of what you do. As far as me, I kind of stumbled into this accidentally. Similar to Lee, I was in retail management for almost 20 years before I had the opportunity through Hooded Horse to publish and further develop Alliance. And I'm very pleased to be able to do so.
Okay, okay. Thank you so much for that intro. Your game looks awesome. 4X, like Kings in space, but with more intricate battles. I'm really excited to give that a shot. And just lastly, my name is Yuji Nakamura. I'm here in Tokyo. I'm developing a game called Mars Tactics, and you can pretty much get the whole gist of the game from the title. It's set in the near future, actually, not too far. About 20 years from now, when we decide that there's something valuable on Mars and we go there to colonize it, and naturally there's a conflict between different sides, and so you actually get to play as either the the workers who were sent to do the job there, uh, or the company that sent them there, and there's a conflict between those two sides. And the game itself is a turn-based tactical combat game, really similar to XCOM, but I would say maybe Jagged Alliance and the older XCOMs are kind of the bigger influences on my side. It's a game that I've wanted to make for my whole life. It has all these things that I wanted to include into it, including a really tight link between the strategy layer and the tactical layer. So a lot of those things are really, really tightly connected, and the transitions are kind of seamless. So the fights really kind of happen all over the map. So yeah, I will have a demo for TactiCon. So as you're watching this, or after you watch this, you can go ahead and check that out. But yeah, that's enough about my game, Mars Tactics. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of maybe follow up and expand on some of the things that we began talking about in the introductions. Maybe I can start with Lee, who you're building such a complicated game. Again, I mentioned there's an orbital layer and there's a land layer, and those are working really seamlessly. And you have all these different ships and stuff going on, as well as the ground units, fighting. And you mentioned that your background is as a teacher. So can you tell me a little bit more about how a teacher began making this really complicated strategy game is set in the future, set in space, and like where do you even begin? I mean, did you know how to code when you began? Can you maybe talk us through a little bit about that a little bit?
So I started similar to how you said, where you go into the rabbit hole on YouTube. I think the three of us might even be in this boat. Eliza is more professionally trained, I believe. Um, Udemy was a great location. The old Brackies before he retired. You got Sebastian Laug, if I'm saying that correctly, who puts out some fantastic programming videos. In fact, a lot of my spherical world stuff is based on his tutorials. I say very loosely based. It's not like his code is in my code base, and I mean that sincerely. And there's such fantastic resources out there nowadays. I know we're not necessarily trying to encourage others into game dev here, but in terms of being able to build these worlds nowadays, it's much easier than it used to be. And especially with Unreal and Unity, flying the flag. Godot's catching up, right? But maybe not if you want to do 3D. And so really, when we talk about where my game comes from, it kind of comes from just playing around with a few ideas. First in Unreal, then over to Unity. And the original idea, I mean, if we're leading in from me being a teacher, like teaching is very, very difficult and very, very stressful. I was actually a science teacher. They made me teach biology, and I don't like biology at all. If anything, I'm quite squeamish. So it's not a good fit. And if any of my students are watching, by the way, go and do your homework. Don't pay attention to any of this. I basically quit, and then I just sort of started watching videos and learning the process. And I was just going to make portfolio pieces. That was my goal. It was like, I'm going to fire them out one game after game after game, little ideas, build a portfolio, and apply for a big, AAA company, I guess, right? Even with no actual, real, solid programming background. And didn't actually happen. I made my first prototype, and that became the game today. So I kind of fell into it, and obviously it's inspired by a number of things. I'm sure we'll get to that sort of category of conversation later on. But if anything, I just sort of fell into it, and you could argue that it's become too ambitious, certainly. But I don't know. I'm rolling with it.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it looks fantastic. Let's talk a little bit more deeply about the game itself. I mentioned you have ships flying in orbit, and as well as ground units, and all of that happens very seamlessly. Unlike in other RTSs where the level begins and everyone's there, in your game there's actually a transition phase, and
Yeah.
it's kind of seamless, right? Going from again the orbit down to the land. Can you talk us through a little bit more about how does those two layers interact and how do they work together? Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess that's become my core sort of idea. That's at the center of everything. Like seamless by design, because I've played so many games like 4Xs and RTSs where it's like mission structured, as you say. It's like, right, mission one, StarCraft, you get your briefing, you go down to the ground. And I just wanted to try and do an experience that was a little bit more, I mean, the word really is seamless. I can't use anything else. So I knew it was possible. You got Planetary Annihilation. They've done something similar with their planets. I was like, come on, let's just do the space thing as well. And I came up with like the orbital movement system. And once I had that kind of fit everything together. And I'm not saying it was easy to make, a whole universe with planets that connect together and systems that connect together, and then being able to go to the planet. You got to obviously optimize like crazy, to make sure that you're only loading in what you need to load in. It's quite complex. And I spent most of my time just working on technical stuff. Planetary generation, as you'll know from Star Citizen and Elite Dangerous, planet generation just never ends. It's a complete, rabbit hole. You just keep going. And I'm still keep going. And, my production crew has to basically say, Lee, you just get on with the gameplay, please. And I'm like, but I need these planets to look good. And so that's pretty much where I'm at.
Okay. And when you have those ships orbiting the planet, as the ground units are fighting on the ground, does having those ships above them in certain formations, does that impact the ground combat? Basically, what's the strategic interplay? What are the tactical elements there between, the interactions between those two layers?
Okay, so obviously you may see from the trailers, you can actually send drop ships with vehicles that are stored above your capital ship down to the ground. In fact, you don't just generate units out of nowhere. You only have what's available actually stored in your hangar decks. And you have to make the drop ships as well. And the drop ships send them down, and then they're just, it's seamless. They're on the ground. You can build bases. Anything you build on the ground can be brought back up to the planet. And same with resources and that kind of thing. And in terms of then the tactics, I think that opens up quite a new avenue, because we've got ships up in orbit, we've got units down the ground. No reason they can't shoot each other in one form or another. We can have an orbital bombardment. We can have units down the ground doing spotting to find fleets on the other side of the planet, and then you could use that spotting data perhaps for the fleet to send missiles around to the other side of the planet. There's a lot of possibilities that on a traditional 2D plane might be harder to realize. And and I think because I am kind of the first to do the whole planet and orbit thing at the same time, I think I need to do everything that people want. People are like, we want ships landing and crashing, and I'm like, okay, I'll do that. Anything from sci-fi I can fit in, it's going in.
Wow, that sounds so cool. I mean, you mentioned so many awesome moments there, spotting on the other side to send missiles and stuff like that. You've probably been playtesting for thousands of hours. Can you remember off the top of your head, like a particularly oh man, that was such a cool moment that made you kind of really want to share that with other people and just like a really cool, memorable moment? Can you give me maybe one example of that?
Well, whenever you see a fleet sort of entering orbit and they kind of spread out into their orbital position, and you got another fleet around the planet already, and they'll just start attacking each other. It looks like a scene from Star Wars or something, where the fleet has just jumped in and suddenly they're all engaging with each other, and that's pretty cool.
That sounds awesome. I can't wait to actually get a chance to try the game myself. Okay, why don't we move to Steve? Steve, your game, you mentioned, I think it said 1,000 years in the future. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you came up with the setting, the influences there, and just tell us a little bit more about the universe that you're trying to build?
Sure. So the idea is that, the backstory essentially is in the 1960s, a meteorite fell to Earth, and it actually contained blueprints to build a Stargate. And so obviously humanity could not build a Stargate in the 60s, so it lay dormant for about 60 years until humanity finally had the technology to build the Stargate. And oh no, when they built the Stargate, in came some nasty aliens, hell-bent on destroying the Earth. So they essentially had to fight off called the Zill, essentially the alien species, and humanity lost. But they were able to get a few ships through the Stargate to basically go to another quadrant of the Milky Way galaxy to kind of resettle and start over. So, so the idea is that these aliens essentially were seeding the galaxy with these blueprints, with the idea that any civilization that could decipher and build it would be advanced enough to pillage their world for tech and energy and things like that. So, kind of a Trojan horse system. So, anyway, so humanity's escaped in a few arcs and kind of rebuilt in a new quadrant. Then they started a new star called Neo-Osiris and New Terra, and they kind of expanded up from there, became the Terran Alliance. About 500 years after that, the Zill found them and came back. I actually have designed a board game on that called Star Requiem. You can find it on Board Game Geek. It's a solo print and play. Essentially, in the canon, humanity held the Zill to a stalemate, but all the destruction caused a lot of the outer colonies to lose contact. And so humanity was kind of reduced to kind of the inner core. And so at that point, they changed the Terran Alliance sort of fell. They went to a sort of a monarchy system. The Great House system was formed around the remaining major cultures in the what we call the core worlds. Excuse me. So, you have this situation. I don't know if you ever played BattleTech or kind of familiar with its background, where you have kind of these great houses. You have technology that's kind of declined since the Star League. In the last 300 or 400 years of the game canon, it's kind of a similar thing. So where you still have high technology, and you still have obviously space travel, but you're almost to a point where you don't understand how it all works. Kind of like Foundation, if you're familiar with that series, where you have this amazing technology, but no one knows how to duplicate it at this point because the Empire has kind of fallen in disrepair. So kind of all those elements come into play. I like the idea of jumping into a kind of a fallen empire. I know most 4X games, you start with a ship, a scout, a transport, one plucky little colony, and off you go to discover the world. That's basically almost every 4X since the dawn of time has started. And I just thought it would be more interesting to have sort of a empire already in place, and you have houses, and you have established characters and lineages, and you are kind of dropped into the middle of this, and your job is to kind of sort out, the problems in your empire, because there are many, and kind of ride the wave and kind of survive and thrive, and eventually beat back the Zill, who may or may not be coming for a third encounter. So, excuse me. That's why we call it Alliance of the Sacred Sun. So, your job eventually will be to kind of reach out and make contact with some of those fallen colonies that have kind of splintered after 500 years. They've kind of created their own cultures that are kind of offshoots of humanity, but they definitely bring different strengths to the empire. So that's kind of the baseline of Alliance. I really like the background. It's a little different than most 4Xs. There aren't aliens except for the Zill, but the idea that you basically play against other humans, other cultures. It's not like aliens per se, but they're very different in how they play. If you remember a game called Sid Meier's Alpha Centauri, very old game, but all human factions, they all came from Earth, but they're very different, and they felt different, and they played different. And when you dealt with the leaders, like you knew Miriam was just gonna, man, I don't want to, I don't want to be an eco, or no, she was the she was the zealot, the religious zealot. Lady Deidre was the Echo lady, but you always knew, and so that's kind of how we want people to feel. We have these different cultures, and we have the house leaders that represent houses that sort of represent the culture, and we want people to kind of feel, oh geez, I'm dealing with Waldegrave, which is a Sparta culture, very warlike and very impetuous, and to know that, oh, this is gonna be a long game if they're have it out for me. So so that's kind of the background. It's just it's kind of a background I've always wanted to play with. I sketched out about 20 or 30 years ago, back when I was in college and thought, this would be a cool setting for a game. And just took a little while to get there, but here we are.
Okay. That sounds amazing. Sorry, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, Steve. That sounds amazing. And I mean, you mentioned that your background was in retail management, and the fact that you came up with this whole world by yourself inside, your head. It's a lot. Oftentimes, we have to do that as developers. Was that just, you said you began in college, so it's been in the works for like, a long time.
Yeah, I mean the core world. I had been learning to program basically since high school. I taught myself C++. Actually, I learned Pascal way back in high school. That won't date me at all. But you know, I have the core world, and I do have to give credit to other people on my team. I have a writer. His name is Oliver. He really kind of came in. He started out as someone that played the free version of the game and had some ideas for the kind of the world building and fleshed out ideas for things, and really came on and helped kind of make that world a lot more visual and fill in a lot of the gaps. But yeah, as far as the core idea and the core of like how humanity fell and just having to crawl back and the struggle against the Zill. Yeah, I've been kind of carrying that with me for a very long time. Like I say, I made a board game about 12 years ago, not knowing I would make this game, but it was just kind of a set in that universe and I just like that idea of humanity triumphant but yet still having to struggle, and you don't have kind of a happy ending. That's kind of the thing. Like ID4, where the aliens, they're kicked off the planet, and that's the end of it. No, there's ongoing repercussions. You won, but you lost 70% of all of humanity. That either died or was lost. So that kind of stuff appeals to me. So
Okay. Very, very cool. Now let's talk a little bit more about the actual gameplay. So it is 4X, and you're doing a lot of empire building, uh, relationship management, but you also have actual tactical battles. And does it work that as you're building the world, the battles themselves are kind of the climatic high that you're constantly building towards? Is that kind of where the climax basically of the gameplay loop?
Well, you do make a lot of decisions that lead to that. Now, the actual combat. So there's two types of combat. There's space combat and ground combat. Now, it's not like Emperor of the Fading Suns where you're literally you're moving the pieces. It's more abstract. But you have to make a lot of decisions to kind of get there. Like you have to build armies, raise garrisons in order to prepare them to land. You don't actually design ships, which is actually a part of the streamlining of the game. You build hulls, and then you create fleets that are purposed for what you're trying to do. Like you might have a terror fleet if you want to, bomb civilians of another house, or an invasion fleet, or a scout fleet, or attack, space combat fleet. So you actually create operations to say, okay, I want you to take out the shipyard, for House Milok, for their capital planet. And so you build the ships, you create fleets for them, you assign admirals to the fleets and grand admirals to the entire operation, and then we're actually revamping that system where you'll actually set the waypoints. You'll have to avoid like hostile houses, or we're adding other empires shortly. And you'll have to kind of route around them, on the galaxy map, so to kind of get to your destination. So no, you don't actually fight the battles, like Master of Orion style, but as far as putting together, the fleets, determining the targets, getting the intel is really important, because military intel you don't necessarily have, even though they're part of your empire. You may not know what type of fleets are there. You may not know what they're building in their shipyards. You may not know how many armies they have on the planet, or what kind of orbital defenses they have. So you have to either send a scout fleet or send what's called an Inquisitor squad, which are basically like highly trained commando squads on the planet to kind of gather more intel. So yeah, and then you research. There's an entire military tree that you can research different hulls and different weapons and different tactics. for ground assault as well as space combat. Again, you don't actually build the ship, so it's not like where you're dragging and dropping the different components onto a ship. Once you've developed the technology, it's assumed that all of your ships automatically kind of upgrade to that, which is something that's really always bugged me about 4X. Is just the tremendous amount of micromanagement and maintaining your designs and upgrading and having to send your fleets back for refit. I mean, some people really love that. I do not, but I like to see the bigger picture and put my fleets and armies in a position to win and to do well.
Okay, okay. Well, it sounds like you have streamlined a lot of those micromanagement, but still maintain, really quite a lot of complexity and mechanical depth there, to keep the players engaged. Also, it sounds like we mentioned. I think Lee mentioned this earlier, but tactics isn't just military movements and things like that. In fact, it can involve political, tactics and political kind of decision making, which I think is maybe quite prevalent or present in your game. Like a lot of the relationship management being very tactical in its nature.
Oh, the characters are very tactical. If you want to think of it in those terms, you meet directly with characters. So, like in a typical 4X, you might tell a planet, "Hey, I need you to build a shipyard." Okay, and it goes in the build queue, and 3 turns later, off you go. In Alliance, you have to actually talk to the Viceroy, and they may or may not, depending on how skilled they are, they may take a lot longer. So you may have to replace them, but you can't replace them if you don't own the planet. So all the houses have holdings that form the empire, but if it's not your owning house's holding, you can't just replace the Viceroy. So you have to talk to the house leader and say, "Hey, your administrator sucks. I want to put someone better, and maybe not even from your house. Is that okay?" And then the house leader has to say, "Okay, that's fine," or no. And then if they say no, you can actually enter what's called oratory combat, which is almost kind of like a card-based combat where you play moves and you basically try to persuade them before their patience runs out. So there's like an oratory battle game within dealing with characters if they say no. Of course, if you lose the game, then they get even more upset with you and you lose a little bit of power. Power is kind of the life of if your power ever drops to 0, you lose the game because you're considered a figurehead. So, but there's so many actions that you can take. Characters have relationships between each other. If I do something to Lee if Eliza doesn't like, even though I never talked to Eliza will be more upset with me because Eliza and Lee were good friends, and I just did something bad to Lee. So that's all factored in as well. Two-factor relationships. So yeah, thinking about it contextually, I know we think of tactical as like war games and battles and things like that, but the human side of Alliance is extremely tactical if you put it in those terms.
Yeah, yeah, okay, that's so cool. So you have, obviously the tactical combat. You said oratory combat as well. That I'm very excited to see how that works, and all of that is set in this, really cool kind of dystopian sci-fi setting. That sounds really, really, really cool.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Steve. Maybe lastly, we can go to Eliza. Thank you for waiting. Let's talk about your game. Yeah, USC Counterforce. It is a top-down, kind of more of a traditional turn-based tactical combat game. Rather than a 4X, we're really focused
Yes.
on kind of the turn-to-turn combat. Can you tell us a little bit more about the inspirations there and what kind of game you're trying to build and how it'll stand apart from other games in the genre?
Sure. So USC Counterforce is basically very in the kind of sense, in technical sense, a low-level tactics game where you're on the ground with your units, your Marines, seeing and managing all their attributes, skills, weapons, uh, inventory loadout, all their movement. So it's a. I wanted to go back to the classics of this genre, like the old UFO. Space Crusade, Jagged Alliance, Incubation, if you remember that title, or Gorky 17. These were games around 20-25 years ago that was unique in a way compared to today's tactics games. They had this low-level, very detailed system where you had all kinds of possibilities without this hand holding these newer games do for you. And of course they were harder because of this, and maybe for a modern audience these have lost some appeal, basically because they are too old to play now on modern computers with good graphics. But USC Counterforce tries to bring back this feeling with modern graphics, a lot of new UI elements, streamlining the gameplay of having this much detail and still being able to play the game with ease. So this is a squad and turn-based game uh, from a top-down view. But one extra we added is a body cam or head camera every unit has. So when you're selecting your unit and playing around with them, you actually see what they see. And further in the development, this camera view will be enhanced to support more interaction and more feedback, more atmosphere to you, but it's already good. Um, and USCCF is action points based, so this is back to the roots, where you have like 50 action points and different kinds of actions and weapon attacks and all kinds of things cost some action points. You can fine tune with skills, items, and what is very important that I have written. The game is a sequel to my previous game, USC, Ultimate Space Commando, that was published in 2015. And it continues the story, and it continues all the gameplay elements that were in place, but I improve on them. And one standout feature is the fully random generated missions and maps in different environments. And not only all missions are randomly generated, but they are fully destructible and interactable, all the maps. So it it doesn't just mean you can destroy walls, but because that's standard in the genre, but you can move objects, make barricades, spill hydrogen on the floor to ignite it and cause a chain reaction, destroy generators to shut down power, and the hydraulic systems then unlock and you can access areas that you haven't been able before. There are hacking mechanisms. Uh, these are these are items you can use, but you can lock doors or open doors. You have a welder, you can weld doors behind you to prevent the horde from attacking you from multiple directions. So it's very underground. Uh, Weapons have different. Yes, the combat system is very deep. I have inspirations from the classical tabletop role-playing games, where combat systems are generally very complicated with all the skills, spells, dice rolls. Of course, many of these is under the hood for the game, but basically the combat system is very complicated with armor penetration, different elemental damages, precision and accuracy of weapons, spread of weapons, an attack pattern of weapons, um, and all kinds of other attributes. You have health, morale, frontal and rear armor, and side armor, which is calculated based on which side you are attacked from your units. So it's a top-down game without elevation. So because I wanted to keep the feeling of the previous game, which is also top-down, and the combat dynamics and the game dynamics is very, I think, and others thought so. So Ultimate Space Commando has a very good rating on Steam. Uh, mm, I didn't want to change the combat dynamics. So it's every map is top down and one level, no elevation data. But for this game, there's also crouching. So if you're in a tight spot, your front unit can crouch down and you can fire over their head, and so on. So there are melee units, melee weapons, all kinds of armor upgrades. So this is the base of the game, a very detailed but very fast-paced. If you want to, there are different the difficulty levels from a very easy to a very punishing one, and there's progression for your squads. There will be actually 4 game modes in the game. One is the campaign mode, which is a beast of its own. It will have the story element, and you will be a bit later on stories, so I return to this. But there's also 3 game modes: defend the base, operations, and single mission. These all share the same squad files. So whichever you play, your squad collects crafting materials and blueprints, which enables them to craft items for themselves, which help them reach higher difficulties. So there's a replayability and an end game. And also the campaign mode, which is integrated in the story, has another layer of tactics or strategy rather, because you have your strike fleet that arrives to the planet to mop up after the great incident from the first game. And so you have limited resources from story, from the so based on the story, you can't really go back to Earth and call for reinforcements. So what you have on your ships, all the personnel and the marines and the stuff you start the game with, that's what you have to complete your mission with. Of course, you can go down to the planet, mine materials, loot things, but you will be very limited. So it's not like I'm going to build another base and I will have a global system of bases to hunt down the aliens that are coming for me. It is we who are coming to the planet to hunt down the aliens, but then surprises will happen. So I don't want to spoil the story, but I can talk about the story too, and the sci-fi part, which is relevant to this panel. So the story is set some 300 years in the future, and I really wanted to don't go overboard with sci-fi themes like plasma weapons and teleportation and all kinds of these things. I don't really like them. I like them if they are in a movie or TV show, if it works well. But I myself, I like the lo-fi version of science fiction, like in Aliens. But there's a problem how to handle interplanetary travel, for example, or interstellar travel, rather. And I wanted to be grounded in some way in physics. Of course, interstellar warp technology doesn't exist in reality, as far as we know currently. Maybe only in theory, but that's not feasible. But it's fiction. So we can say that 100 years in the future, we will discover this technology. But discovering a technology doesn't mean it can be used widespread. So it would be very expensive, very hard to produce. So basically, interstellar travel is something that only the richest mega concerns, the companies that control Earth, very war-ridden Earth. So I'm a pessimistic person in this kind. I think in the future there will be wars on Earth, and countries won't be as important in the future as capitalist concerns that control technology and food and water and IDs. So there will be a few factions in the game. You can choose a mentor, and they will fund you as a commander of the United Space Command Fleet. So there will be some intrigue and another layer of gameplay in the campaign where you have some political problems you have to solve while you are dealing with an alien threat.
And okay, so there's all these different factions, but you as the player, who do you play as? Is it the Megacorps or so who do you play as?
You are playing a United Space Command officer. That is the United Space Agency that all the mega corporations fund together. But inside that context, they are fighting each other for more control and technological advance. So you will have to choose which corporation you want to please, or none at all. Maybe you want to stay clean. So interstellar travel is very complicated. So basically, only a few megaships exist that can, with very big precautions, can jump to a system that is deemed favorable, and then they build something I call a relay gate, and this relay gate can occasionally gather enough energy to help smaller ships to go to that system. And also interstellar communication is limited, so you can't send a message and get back an answer immediately. You have to wait 4 or 5 days to get back a message from anywhere. So you will be isolated with your fleet, and suddenly you will realize that there's this planet where the previous incident occurred, a first contact with aliens. There are no aliens in the universe, no intelligent aliens, so humankind is alone. But there are these creatures on this planet that came from nothing, and you have to investigate what are these. But suddenly you will see a moon uh, appearing from nowhere, a rocky body, a small rocky body that looks like a moon or a planet, and that's where your troubles will really start. Because, but I don't really want to spoil it.
It's the Death Star, right?
I just say it's not the standard story of some highly evolved alien culture that uses spaceships to travel the universe and find planets to attack. So it is something. It's something else. Something I I feel unique. But the atmosphere of the game will be very like an aliens. Something from the aliens universe with tight corridors, with desolate bases. You don't know what happened. There are these creatures, all kinds of creatures. It doesn't make sense. So you will have to understand what is happening really with all these.
Okay, that's
All this.
yeah, that sounds amazing. I mean, the amount of detail that you've put into all the different systems in the game. You mentioned recoil and spread, and you mentioned like side
Yes.
armor. That's really cool to have all those different little systems playing together. I'm also really curious how you'll handle like recoil and spread in a 2D top-down game. It almost sounds like something that is out of a first-person shooter, really. So yeah, that sounds really cool. And I have to just ask you, the first thing that really grabbed me when I looked at your trailer was this green little camera. So it's a top-down game, and you can tell it's a top-down game. But then all of a sudden, there's this
Yes.
3D camera in the top right, and it seems to be more than just like a gimmick. It seems to be actually it's a view into what the soldiers are seeing from their point of view. Can you tell us
Yes.
a little bit more about how that camera interacts with the gameplay, or is it just a kind of visual add-on?
Uh,
Yeah. How do those mechanics and stuff work with the 3D camera?
yes. So this is very tricky because we don't want to make it mandatory to use in order to play the game, because it's basically a top-down tactical game, and we don't want this camera to be mandatory to look at. But we have ideas. For example, you can hack into a CCTV system and browse through all the cameras and get information about the different rooms and places in the mission through the camera view to prepare for what's in a room. Or maybe you can use an item you carry with yourself, activate it, and then uh, if the map is very dark, maybe lights also went off, because lights can go off if power is turned off in the game. Maybe in the tactical camera view, you still see the aliens because they are in night vision. They are visible in night vision. So you can combine these. This is something we will iterate during the development still, but basically there's a lot of possibilities we want to make available. But the main reason why it's there is because I just love James Cameron's Aliens, and those body cameras when they are in the nest and they starting to pick them off one by one. And there was Space Hulk. Space Hulk was a very good game, I think, and it also had this perspective. You saw what your individual units can saw with their cameras. So I wanted to recreate this feeling when you're not disjointed from your squad because of the top-down view. So basically, it's there for atmospheric reasons, for thematic reasons, but it also has some use. for the player.
That's so cool. And just thematically, when I saw it, even before hearing anything about the game, I definitely got that Aliens, a vibe. I think Aliens 2 was kind of the first time that we really saw those body cams being used a lot in the movie, and just I think what I've seen from the trailer, uh, it definitely feels like a hark back to the original XCOM, which is a turn-based tactical game, but also had a lot of horror elements because of that kind of kind of playing in the darkness, overwhelming odds. So yeah, your game looks really really cool. Excited to try it. I think you mentioned that it'll be available right now on TactiCon. So after this stream, if you guys want to go ahead and download USC Counterforce, it will be available from today, from the beginning of TactiCon. Yeah, and so very excited to check that out. Actually, I hadn't heard about USC prior to this prior to this panel. So great to discover these games. I think there's over 100 games, in this festival. So yeah, everyone should definitely check that out. Yeah,
There are a lot of iterations to get there, believe
yeah,
me.
I'm sure. I'm sure that just to be able to go through all those layers and streamline them, all of them, just for it to be manageable for players to consume. Okay, so maybe
So, Yuji, I think you need to tell us a little about your game now, don't you think?
yes.
Yes.
Sure. I guess it's my turn. Mars Tactics. It's been in development just for only about a year, so we're still quite early in development. It's really rough around the edges, but the core idea behind it was, I just think that really deep sci-fi. I enjoy that. Star Trek, of course. I think about that probably every day. But also, to me, kind of the near future is also, I think, a really interesting setting to explore, because we won't have a lot of these developed systems and drones and automated kind of colonization. That's not going to be what we see in our lifetimes. Hopefully, we'll probably see a more of a messy kind of rollout throughout the solar system. And I thought, an interesting question is to ask is, well, what if the first person who lands on Mars actually isn't a NASA astronaut? It's not a Chinese astronaut. It's not a European astronaut. It's just an employee for a company there to make a buck. And when they get to Mars, their motives aren't really necessarily science and discovery and things like that. Their motives are very different. It's a private company. It's a for-profit company, and so they will be there. And if there is a conflict and they don't have all the resources, like because they're so far away from Earth, like how do they go about solving those issues, and also how do they, what does combat actually look like? Just to come back to the theme of this panel, when you don't have gunpowder on Mars, what do you use to fight, right? And so I thought that early near future kind of setting would be really interesting to explore. My Discord community has been really great about helping me explore some of these ideas. So just going back to the gunpowder example, in my universe, we have discovered a really powerful new element that helps us create really strong batteries. So we decided to lean on that and create, coil guns basically. And I got to tell you, like, thinking about what combat will look like with coil guns on Mars in the future, low gravity, there are all these things that have been really, really fun to explore. For example, because the atmosphere is so thin, actually heat doesn't dissipate as quickly. And so how do you design the weapons around the fact that, where does that heat go? Actually, okay, so maybe it loops back into your bodysuit and it helps warm, the soldier. And so thinking about all these different little sci-fi / military ideas has been, honestly, I didn't even think about a lot of this stuff. So kudos to my Discord community for helping me, for asking so many questions very passionately. But it's been a lot of fun thinking about that and thinking about what kind of combat you can really have in these low gravity, thin atmosphere. Also very few resources. So managing resources is a huge part of my game. Um, Managing ammo, you can't just hit the reload button. You have to think, okay, how many bullets do I still have in the magazine? How many magazines do I still have left? Do I have enough resources in the world layer to create more magazines? And it makes you think about, okay, do I really want to spray and pray, to suppress these enemies here? Or do I try to conserve that ammo to maybe use it later at a more, opportune time? And so just really kind of grabbing the idea that we're fighting really, really far from Earth, where we don't have all the resources. Um, that I would say is kind of the core thematic drive of the game. And yeah, just, this near future setting has given me like a lot of interesting ideas for how to design
That's
the
very good.
combat in the game.
Sounds cool.
So Yuji, in your universe, in your setting, is Elon Musk responsible for getting you guys to Mars? He'd still be alive.
He certainly will. I mean, the game is set in 2040, so he'll definitely be alive. And even if he's not alive, I'm sure he'll upload his consciousness and, remain sentient on Twitter. So yeah, you can't really escape his grasp. And certainly, I mean, I grew up watching the Mars rovers land there, and then over the years, certainly from Musk, how hard he's pushing it, he's certainly played a role in me wondering what will happen. The game specifically, there's the company that goes to get these valuable resources on Mars. Its workers are mistreated and they strike back or they rebel, and so the conflict, you can actually play as both sides. You can play as the workers who are rebelling and trying to establish their independence, or at least the way back home to Earth. Um, or it's the company that is trying to expand, obviously profit, but if you want to talk a little bit bigger, it's pushing humanity ahead at a faster pace. And so this conflict, to me, it echoes back to actually 100 years ago. You had these company towns, right? As the United States was developing, and the workers were cut off completely from the rest of the world because you lived in a company town, you ate there, you're completely, at the mercy of the company, which will actually be, I think, really similar on Mars, where you're not going to have communications, you're not going to have independent communications, you're not going to have, food and unlimited resources. A lot of that will be filtered through the company. So it creates this very asymmetrical kind of power imbalance between the workers and the employees and the employer.
So, can you tell us a little bit more about like your overview? You're comparing this to what XCOM. Therefore, you've got the geo view of sorts. Am I understanding that correctly? And then you got the tactical layer as well, but you're moving people around the world. How is that strategic layer actually represented?
Yeah, so that's probably the most unique thing about my game is that the world layer and the tactical combat is really, really closely connected. When you begin a battle, if you run away to the east and you escape battle to the east, back in the world map, your units will be, in the world grid to the east of where the battle began. Likewise, reinforcements, if you had reinforcements near the battle in the world layer, they will enter when the actual combat begins. They will enter from their respective sides, and so there's this kind of seamless connection between, the world layer and the tactical layer. I think that's kind of the most unique thing about my game, and I hope people will enjoy that. But as you develop that, there's just so much more complexity, and I think Lee, your game, by combining different layers, you're gonna have to educate the player and make the whole control and an interface very seamless, which I imagine is quite a challenge to do that, especially in a 3D kind of game as well.
Yeah, I'm having to sort of borrow as much as I can from other games that did it better, I guess. Like my sort of hierarchy view is basically borrowed from Sins of a Solar System, where you've got every single unit sort of displayed in a sort of hierarchical kind of way on the left-hand side of the screen, and you can kind of quickly get to everything. You try to categorize by planets, and you kind of create these hierarchies because you can assign leaders to the fleet elements, and so you can create groupings instead of there just being your usual like 1 to 9. You press your number key and you switch to that group. You create those groups and then assign numbers to them, so you can create whatever kind of groups you want to. And it's trying to come up with modern ways of conveying the way that a player can collect that information and sort of go through it quick enough and easily enough without it overwhelming them. And that is, of course, the problem with this sort of scope. It's a lot of fancy UI and sort of learning from what other people have done before.
Yeah.
Pardon me.
That sounds like as your scope grows and the amount of things that you want to put in the game, like how do you manage scope, feature creep and
Well,
I'll tell you how I deal with it. I have a deadline. We had to actually cut some initial elements that we had in the original design just because we couldn't do them well. And we made a decision as a team pretty early on. We would rather have fewer features but do them well than opposed to try to do everything but do it half-assed. Pardon my French. And so, if we can't make a system work really well within the parameters of the game design, by the time the game releases, then it's going to get cut and moved to a future release.
Yeah, for sure. Go
uh,
ahead, Lisa.
my strategy was to focus on the core gameplay mechanics first and make a version of it that is kind of balanced. It's not fully balanced yet because a lot of enemies and weapons are still missing and so on, but it works very good. And based on that version of the core gameplay, which is the tactical part of the mission, I can now start working on the 3 different new game modes. The operations mode, which is available in the demo, which means there's a consecutive series of missions between which you cannot go back to base. So you have to spend your ammunition and all kinds of items wisely during the mission. And if one of your Marines fall, he will not be there in the next mission, obviously. So that's like a mini campaign with a small story. And there will be defend the base mode, which I know it sounds, and about feature creep, it maybe sound a bit much more ambitious than possible, but that will be a game mode where you can build a base, a functioning base with a reactor and some utility rooms and defenses like turrets and walls and fortifications. And it's important because you can play this game mode separately, but the strategy was that this kind of mission where you build a base and hold it against hordes of aliens will be a core mechanic in the campaign itself. And the operations mode with multiple missions after each other are that's also something that you will see in the campaign. So I'm building the game gradually with components that are playable by themselves, and they help create the whole campaign experience step by step. So this way, I am not going overwhelmed with this feature creep to add this and add this because it's all planned how I reach the complete game for the campaign. And the campaign will have another layer I haven't talked before, just a few sentences. It will have a strategic map of the planet where you will move your squads, and you can even be able to tactically nuke grids on the planet's surface if you don't want to deal with an alien horde that approaches one of your bases. So it won't be seamless, but you will in fact be able to control the global scope of the battle against the aliens from orbit.
Nice.
Just
When in doubt, nuke 'em, right?
there's only one way to be sure.
Exactly. Very cool.
Go.
Yeah, Lee, go ahead.
I will put whatever I want in my game. There you go. That's my philosophy. No, I need to stop. Yeah, I'm at the point where I'm stopping, and yeah, it's just gameplay focused now. So it is what it is. We know what it is now. It is escaping from the Cylons. I can't say that out loud, but I just did, didn't I? We know what it is. It will work. So I've just spent 2 years working on technical stuff, tool sets, not very glamorous stuff. Being able to build your own planets, being able to sort of build your own sort of campaigns, and put together your own fleets, and like what they're all different components. I've been one of these crazy people who's decided, oh, I won't just build these tools in Unity that only I can use. I'm going to make it so that everyone can use them and they're actually part of the game. And so then, of course, you have to make the UI really nice and intuitive. And so it's almost like I'm making 4 games. So we're talking about scope, right? Yeah, it is where it is. And yeah, yeah, people probably need to tell me to stop. Thank you for telling me to stop. That's
Yeah,
useful.
you're certainly welcome. Okay. Let me just ask you. What do you think sets your game like really,
I
really
mean,
apart?
obviously, everyone initially just thought it was the next planetary annihilation, which I obviously had to dispel. I can't deal with that many units. Their entire infrastructure, their engine was designed with that in mind. So that's not happening. But it will be a bit more tactical. Which brings us back to the topic. Each unit is a little bit more like an XCOM unit. It has its own name, it has its own values and things like that. It's not quite a straight RTS. It's a little bit more thinking about what available things you've got, and you don't want to lose those things obviously because it takes ages to rebuild them. You got to build all the subcomponents and then take the time to build that back up. Same with capital ships, for example. You got to actually set up like a hangar, or like a dock in orbit, and actually spend the time building a ship. But of course you're being chased. You can't linger as long as you might want to. And so yeah.
Right, and also I think a big part of the tactical strategy elements is the fact that you have modular units. We mentioned earlier Alpha Centauri, where you could design your own tanks and stuff like that. Is that what level of customization do you have, and what does that actually mean for the
Everything
game? Um,
is mostly the units are modular and slightly in looks, not completely. Like they do have a chassis that is obviously consistent across that type. The capital ships are less modular, mostly because the models I'm using are full meshes, and it's not very easy to sort of take that apart and do modular things with that. And so the units can be, the weapons can be changed. You can add equipment, that kind of thing. So of course, tactically, that gives you a vast range. And what I'd really like to do as well is because I've got multiple planet types, like you can have desert planets, you can have ice planets. Again, staples of sci-fi. It's going in. There's going to be a Dune, Battle for Arrakis type thing. There's going to be a Hoth. Why not? And so I want units to be sort of customizable based on their intended habitat. So you will actually have snow speeders. You will actually have, things that are tailored to a certain type of planet, and that they'll actually be more optimal. And obviously, you're like, well, do I store all these snow and desert vehicles, or do I just go for more general vehicles? Like, how do you want to play it? Maybe you'll be really specialized on a certain type of planet, but maybe those planets will never come up. And so, there's things like that you can do when we're talking about tactics in the future. There's technology can come in, and obviously, like the actual tools that we have available as developers have progressed so that future tactics now is so much more diverse. Things we couldn't do like 20 years ago, we are now capable of because the CPU power, the GPU power has moved along so much. We can have much bigger games with much grander ambitions, and we can start adding in these RPG elements like what Steve is accomplishing with Alliance. You know, we're starting to want our games to be more like simulations rather than just clicking to move things, right? We're moving on. Tactics is becoming more whatever humans can think of. You're going to be able to do it in a game, and hopefully VR eventually as well, right? But it's still in its infancy. Let's be honest.
Yeah, I mean that's the dream. I think put on the headset and then you can look down on your units as you move them around with your hands. I think you know pretty soon. I think it should be doable. It's exciting to think about that. Steve, just going to you, as watching your trailer, one of the things I noticed in one of the segments of the trailer is that you have the ability to do precision strikes on the enemy military, but you can also just bombard kind of blindly across the entire solar system. And what are the decision processes there? Can you talk us a little bit about the tactical, decision making, attack versus bombardment? Like, what are the
Yeah, well, the dynamic of alliance is interesting because you're not. It is one empire, and so you have these six great houses, one of which is yours, is the ruling house. Occasionally, they want to do something crazy, like try to take the throne from you, or try to usurp the emperorship, and you can't have that. So you have to kind of draw the line between, okay, I need to preserve the empire as a whole, because if the empire falls, you lose. It's kind of all for one and one for all. However, sometimes the kids get unruly and you have to take more direct action. So one of the things you can do is you can do terror bombardment. So if you want to kind of there's a kind of a detailed system for the ruler that involves a popular support and fear, and you have these two metrics throughout the empire. And if your fear is very high, then you basically are ruling like a tyrant. And it's a lot cheaper to do. You don't have to do things like welfare and social services, but you do have to consistently prove your military might. And so if you let your fleets drop or your military budget drop or you stop doing tyrannical things, then your fear will slowly drop. And obviously, your political support won't be very high either because they don't like you very much. So if you choose to rule that way, you can, and that involves basically terror attacks against people, bombarding. Planets are actually very detailed. Planets have regions, and then there are sectors within regions that produce. You have like an energy sector, farm sector, manufacturing sector, and that's where your people live and work. So you can actually you can't literally individually target them, but you can target certain types of sectors and regions. So the trick is not to do too much damage, because if you damage a planet significantly, guess what? You're not getting the tax revenue from it. You're not getting the resources from it. And in order to build these gigantic projects that span provinces and systems, you have to have a large amount of resources which come from the other planets and the other houses. So it's a real balancing act of, you don't want to hollow out your empire just because you can. You have to do it in kind of tactically and pick your moments when you need to kind of make a statement to a house or to your people.
Okay. Okay, I see. So that's how you can also target civilian infrastructure instead of just military, and actually very precise too. You can target, like he's mentioned, sectors like the agricultural sector or something. Okay, okay, got it. Thank you, Steve. One thing I wanted to ask Aliza is you mentioned that you have stuff like destructible environments and barricades, and that sounds really, really cool. And I'm wondering if that is also something that maybe was possible in the past. That modern hardware is allowing you to deform, the environment in real time in unexpected ways. Can you talk a little bit about, the procedural destruction and stuff like that in your game, USC?
It was possible then because it's basically a feature of the rule system. So there are objects that are movable, like crates, barrels, doors you can open and close and lock or weld, and also but there will be new things like an energy field you can deploy to a grid that creates for 1 turn or 2 turns an impenetrable energy field you can use to protect yourself from multiple directions if you don't have if you're in an open position, so you can actively influence the way the enemies can get to you, which is very important because in USC you are not fighting 10 or 15 enemies at once. You are fighting 50 to 60 or 80 enemies at once. Of course, they don't come at the same time, but they are coming. The small ones come first to draw your fire. Then you have ranged attackers who scatter your lines, and then you have the big melee attacker, alien-like xenomorph-like units that if they get close to you, they can rip through your units. And you need and there are also small critters that are in big numbers and can creep up on you from behind, and you have to take this into consideration. So, for example, the small aliens are afraid of fire. They won't enter fire. So if you light things up behind you, create a wall of fire and put barricades in front of you, or pull an explosive barrel into position to destroy it on demand, you can control the way the alien horde is onto you. And exceptionally on the higher difficulty levels, this is mandatory for victory. Otherwise, you will get butchered. So
Okay, that's so cool that there's so much interaction with the environment. I asked this Lee earlier. I asked like during your playtesting and the many hours that you've been doing it, can you remember like a favorite moment, like a something that's really cool that happened, during the game early on?
y- yeah, it was a defeat. So my whole squad got wiped out in a turn. But it was in the mines environment where the, there are crystals that are mostly impenetrable, so you can use them to hide from the aliens. But somehow a bunch of reapers, those are very big, very powerful melee attackers, broke through, uh, killed one of my marines, injured one another, and when the turn ended, more of my marines got panicked and got berserk and started shooting at each other and all kinds of things. One of them shoot a barrel that exploded, sending two marines into a fiery death instantly. And the last marine who was alive dropped his weapon and started running into the darkness where more reapers were standing. So it was not a it was not a moment of victory and glory, but it was very memorable. And I know if someone takes the game seriously and dies this way, uh, they will like it, because it gives you a real sense of terror and difficulty and challenge you have to learn to overcome with your tools. And there are a lot of tools available. So I always refer to the game as a controlled chaos simulator.
Yes, a lot of memories from original XCOM and all the the chain panic attacks and multiple suicides and all that. A lot of fun. Steve, going to you. How about yourself during your many thousands of hours of playtesting? I'm sure. Is there a moment that kind of stands out in your
Mhm.
memory that
Yeah.
that was really really memorable for you?
Yeah, actually, I posted about it on Twitter not too long ago. My provincial governor was getting on in years, and I guess they had a beef with their system governor, one of the system governors, because she tried to have him assassinated. Um, because one of the things you always move up in Alliance, you either move up or you get fired to being a courtier. So there's a plot system where characters kind of have their own agendas, and they a lot of times it's benign, just gain power, gain money, help out a friend, but sometimes a little more nefarious. So in this case, you can you can plot to take over house leadership, you can plot to have someone killed. In this case, depending on characters' personality and traits and what they're able to do. So I just thought it was amusing because they were from the same house. They were both from my house. And so when I discovered it, I had to make a decision like, do I let this happen? Or do I put an inquisitor on to try to stop the plot? Or do I tell my system governor what's happening and in the process really piss off my province governor, who's almost as powerful as me? So, those are kind of the little stories that can be told within the game. There's a strong role playing element, but I just found that highly amusing for some reason.
Nice. I'll have to check out your Twitter feed to catch that one. I know we're running out of time, but I just wanted to ask everyone real quick. This being TactiCon, what are some games you're looking forward to in the future outside of the four that we talked about here today? Just anything that you're looking forward to, in the strategy and the tactical genre.
Well, as someone who perhaps probably plays RTSs more than straight tactics games, I'm looking forward to Homeworld 3. I'm sorry to dip into the AAA sphere there. I know we're indie developers. We're supposed to only play indie games. And Sins of a Solar System, the second one, apparently got announced.
You took
That'll
my
be
thunder.
good too. Yeah, sorry.
All right. Been waiting 15 years for a sequel.
Yeah, I think it just got announced just the other day, right?
Yeah, that'll be good.
Steve, how about yourself? What are you looking forward to?
Actually, keeping it in the stable, I'm really looking forward to Terra Invicta. Our games are kind of, I mean, they're not similar genre, but Terra Invicta is almost like an alternate beginning point for my game universe, and so I really like, like XCOM games. I like those type of sort of global strategy games that have that tactical layer, and so I'm really curious to see how Terra Invicta kind of handles the tactical elements, strategic elements, and the character elements, which they kind of have all three. So I'm definitely going to be picking that up when it launches in about a week.
Yep, very excited. Lisa, how about yourself? Any games you're looking forward to?
Maybe Xenonauts 2 I have in my sights, and also Baldur's Gate 3. I know it's not a strategy game, but obviously it has tactical elements as a very in-depth RPG. And back then with Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, I soloed those games as well as Icewind Dale with 1 or 2 characters instead of 6. Exploiting all the system elements that can be exploited. So I'm very looking forward how the tactical aspect of Baldur's Gate 3 will be. Of course, the story will be very interesting too, but it's in early access, and I want to wait for the full
Can I say
release.
one more? I can't believe I forgot it. You reminded me. The Master of Magic remake. That was like my all-time favorite game growing up, along with Master of Orion. And I cannot believe it took them 30 years to come up with a modern sequel or a modern remake.
Yeah. I think is that coming out again? Is it?
Next year? I think it's not imminent, but they've been working on it a while. They announced it, I guess, 5 or 6 months ago.
Mhm.
I think it's next year. Don't quote me on that, but it's not terribly soon.
Okay. All right. Thank you, guys. For me, I am dipping my toes in the AAA pool again. Also, Jagged Alliance 3, I think looks really good. So excited for that one. I'm not sure when it's coming out, but a lot of games. Also, a lot of games here in TactiCon. Maybe just to wrap it up, starting with Eliza, I know that you mentioned that USC does have a demo out available right now. Can you talk us a little bit about the demo and also when the full release or early access is planned and the timeframes there?
Yes, during TactiCon. Maybe about a year from now. So definitely 2023, but Q3 or Q4, I don't really know yet, but it's planned for next year, later next year.
Okay.
But
Uh-huh.
sorry, I forgot. That's the full release. Early access will come early next year, maybe maybe around March. So
Okay. And then Steve, yourself, what kind of timeframes are we looking at for Alliance of the Sacred Sons? I think you mentioned, was it this year that you're thinking about release?
Mhm.
Could you, updates?
Yeah, well, we also have a demo. Actually, we just updated it.
Mhm.
So if you play, we had a demo out about a year ago. The game has changed a tremendous amount since then. So if you played the demo a year ago, I encourage you to try it again if you had any sort of interest at that time. We've updated pretty much all the graphics. It's a lot more stable. We've added quite a few gameplay elements. As far as the true release date, so we're going to be doing an early access release. We want to make sure that we have kind of a core game experience that's fun. So it's going to be essentially a complete game, but we're going to continue to add to it some of the things that we had envisioned in the original design. Right now, our release date is 2022,
Wow.
sometime in 2022. So
Okay. Not
no, there aren't. So yeah, we're getting up to it.
Yeah, not many months left. Okay. All right. Sounds good. Thank you. And shooting over to Lee, can you tell us a little bit about the timeframes for Fragile Existence?
Uh,
No demo,
There is
right?
no demo, no.
Yeah.
Only because I'm too proud to put something out yet. And internally, we're talking about some point next year. You know, it's still evolving. I don't want to give anything too concrete just yet. And yeah, next year. It'll be early access as well. So you know, I'd rather skip early access if I really could, but can I with my scope? And so yeah, early access next year.
Got it. And before the release or the early access, can we expect a demo of some
I'd
kind?
like to do one, but you know, that's a discussion I obviously have to have with Hooded Horse. But there'll definitely be testing, you know, alpha testing, and you know, Discord is the place to find out about that, I guess. That should hopefully be by the end of the year. So
Oh,
we'll see how that goes.
okay. All right. Cool. You guys heard it here first. Maybe alpha before the end of the year. Fragile Existence. Very cool. And then finally, on my end, Mars Tactics will have a demo ready and TactiCon. So right now you can go and download it. If you have ever played it in the past, it's improved quite a bit, although we are still very early. I've been kind of adopting a trial by fire kind of approach where I just put it out and I get feedback because I really want to develop together with the community. So check out Mars Tactics demo now. Please join Discord, or just like there's a feedback form, you can drop comments in there within the game without leaving the game. So yeah, and as far as the full release, aiming for next year, I think that's still on schedule. And yeah, you know, we'll see. But for now, I'm really trying to develop together with the community. So going really from demo to demo, getting feedback. But a lot of the systems are in this demo for the first time. You know, the strategy layers in there, the loop is all there. So yeah, check that out now, Mars Tactics. Okay, so I think we can probably wrap it up. Thank you for joining us. Tactics in the Future. We talked about, you know, all the cool things that go on into making sci-fi and tactical games in the future, and also with you know, combat, or whether it's politics, or whether it's something else. The things that go into designing these. It's so great to have this event, TactiCon, specifically for strategy and tactical games. So I hope you guys go out there and find some cool titles to play, and a lot of these demos. And thank you again for all the panel participants joining across all the various different time zones. Thank you very much for your interesting commentary, and look forward to playing your games. Thank you guys. So
Thank you for hosting.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers.
Okay. All right. Bye, everyone. Enjoy the festival.
Bye bye.